our next MP. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you wouldn't mind, put your hands together, please, for Dr. David Young.
Ladies and gentlemen, I recognise not all of us, not all of you perhaps, I am a UKIP supporter, and you're very welcome, whatever party you have supported in the past, and whatever party you may support in the future. You're heavily outnumbered by UKIP supporters here because we just had the AGM. But we welcome at these public debates an opportunity to meet everyone from the wards that we're leafleting one by one, and we've relished the debate that we can have. And I'm here really to help put the UKIP perspective. And that's what I'd like to do. I'd like to really start by asking, why are we here? And our chairman actually interestingly touched on it in his remarks. He said he's here for our country. And I'm here for our country. And I think country is actually important and something we can and need to be proud of. At our last meeting, somebody said, what's the country done for me? I don't think we need country. I think we should move to higher levels of political aggregation. But it seems to me that's sad. It's bothered me ever since he said that. You know, I'm sad that that man feels that. And I feel I owe a tremendous amount to my country, the educational system and the culture and everything. And I've had the privilege to live and work abroad in other countries, which I also have appreciated and respected in many ways. But I love many things about our country, and I've come to appreciate them more for having lived elsewhere. And it seems to me that we all need our country, whichever country we're from. You know, there's an important sort of level or series of shells of belonging. We have our family, and that's important. And we have perhaps our work community. We have our town and our city. But country is a very important level of community, and it contributes to our identity. And the pain that I went through as we moved towards and through the Scottish independence referendum, particularly having a Scottish father and English mother, was an indication to me actually of how tied up with our identity our country is. So I think we need our countries, we need our countries to work, the communities within which we have to thrash out certain things together. And in our country, I think we have a lot to be proud of. We have more to be proud of and less to be ashamed of than many people in many other countries. And I remember today is the anniversary, the 50th anniversary of the death of Churchill. And we've been thinking a lot in recent months about the anniversary of the First World War and all that that stood for. And I think at this time, and as we move through 2015 towards the general election, a lot of people in our country will be remembering the history of sacrifice that's gone on to establish the freedoms which we enjoy in this country, and which are fragile, and which we're seeing, as recent events in Paris have shown, are increasingly fragile. And so if we're concerned about our country, we have to ask what's best for our people. Well, who am I to say what's best for our people? But let's think about what our people say they want. That's a good starting point. And in the recent YouGov poll, you know they do this regularly, they look at which of the following issues are the most important facing the country. And they also ask the same question in terms of facing you and your family. And there are rather different answers, not actually for the top three, but as you go down the whole list, the ranking is different. And I must just say, I think it's a wonderful thing about this country, which I haven't found anywhere else that I've lived. I haven't found any other group of people, that as we have in Britain, who are able to distinguish those two things. Political debate in this country is very much about what's best for the country, rather than what's best for me. And I think that's a great, fine and noble characteristic of our people. And I think we need politicians and we need political debate that tries to pull our people together and ask jointly and together what is best for our country and how do we broker it, how do we find agreement with our differences towards that aim. Cameron came in promising to abolish Punch and Judy, and he acknowledged that he failed. But I think we should still try and abolish Punch and Judy and try and get these issues of what matters for our country. Now, interestingly, the top three were very close in this YouGov poll. In terms of what's important for the country, the top position actually, interestingly, was immigration. I don't think we feel the weight of the immigration issue so strongly down here. But on a recent business trip to the north of England, it was brought home to me how strongly people do feel about how alienated they can be when they do feel that their culture is being swamped by other cultures. Which isn't to say other cultures are bad, but there's a sense in many parts of the country that we just can't, we're losing our sense of identity, we're losing a sense of cohesion as a result of the volume of immigration. Anyway, the second issue at the national level, according to the YouGov poll, is the economy with 48%, and health as third at 46%. Whereas what's important for yourself and your family, at the top came economy, then health, and then pensions, with immigration fourth. So those three issues of immigration, economy, and health are right up there, whichever way you look at it. And the difference comes out lower down in other issues. And today I'd come back to the YouGov points and say the only way we can even tackle immigration is by leaving the EU. And by leaving the EU, I think there would be a tremendous boost to the economy. We in UKIP are not alone in feeling that we'd be better off out, but economically, it is my firm conviction that we would be better off out. We've hitched our star to the EU, which has now been overtaken by the Commonwealth in terms of size of the global economy. The Commonwealth, taken together, is growing faster and is a bigger percentage of the world economy, something like 18, 19, 20%, than the EU, which is in decline. We would be free to negotiate trade arrangements not only with the EU, but also with the Commonwealth and the United States and China and whoever we want. And we'd save the membership cost, which is about £55 million a day, by leaving the EU. So definitely and obviously we'd be better off outside of the EU in terms of dealing with the economy. And in terms of health, we'd have a lot more resources to throw at the NHS if that were the case. We have just reiterated our policy with respect to the NHS, which is that we are committed to having it free at the point of need, having it state-owned and state-funded. Now, I think the challenge for us in UKIP, which is the only party that's united in wanting to leave the EU, is that the EU itself, as a single issue, doesn't rank very high up on those lists. But the point I'm trying to make is that leaving the EU would help us address each of those three things that do rank highest as the issues for our country. And so it's very important that we support the only party that's united in its desire to see Britain leave the EU. Our membership of the EU is not only a hindrance to our ability to tackle many of our pressing problems, it's becoming a menace. I'm not talking about the irritating product restrictions on vacuum cleaners and things like that. I'm talking about the dangerous Euro-driven boom and bust that has really damaged the southern European economies and which is pushing Greece towards a socialist solution which may well take them out of the Eurozone and out of the EU. The economic shock to all of our banking systems when Greece and or others exit the Eurozone is going to be very serious. And the dangerous conflict to which the EU has contributed in the Ukraine, I think, is something which gives the lie to the argument that the EU is the guarantor of peace in Europe. The EU has been courting various former satellites of the Soviet Union, or parts of the Soviet Union, drawing them into the EU and drawing them into NATO, which is good for the peoples concerned, of course, but it is poking the Russian bear. And I think when it went to the Ukraine and it threatened the Soviet access to the Black Sea, we were likely to get the kind of reaction that we're seeing. And I think we need to ask, where's the EU headed? Clearly it's headed towards political union without democracy and without accountability. The accounts haven't been signed off for 19 years in a row, and as for democracy, you can only remember the series of referenda on the EU constitution where the French, the Dutch, the Irish said no, if not once, twice, and still we get the issues of the constitution in through the back door in the Lisbon Treaty. So it's headed to political union without democracy and accountability. It's headed towards the inclusion of Turkey. It's headed towards the rollout of the euro, and I think it's only a matter of time before Britain would have to join the euro. Every country that's joined in the last 5 years has had to join the euro, and when Britain is forced to join the euro, because we're all grateful that we didn't, whatever we think about UKIP, I think that will push us out. So to my mind, it's only a matter of time before we leave. But we're seeing increasing tensions on the north-south divide within Europe, which are quite alarming. The ostrich economies of southern Europe won't appreciate the kicks in the derriere from northern Europe, which they're going to get. And they're not going to willingly pull their heads out of the socialist sands of southern Europe. So I think we're in for a rough time. The EU doesn't honour democracy, it doesn't honour accountability, it doesn't honour common sense, it doesn't honour the hard-won protections of the individual against the power of the state, it doesn't honour moral principles, and it certainly doesn't honour God, who was removed from its Article 2, I think, some years ago. The EU is forcing the pace of European integration, sacrificing sovereignty and sense without protecting democracy and decency. It won't work, it's heading for disintegration, and the sooner we all abandon the dangerous and misguided vessel, the better for all of us. Not only in Britain, but across Europe. I think Britain can lead the way for the third time in 100 years on this matter. So, in our view, the EU is headed for the rocks like the Titanic, and UKIP is sounding the alarms and manning the lifeboats. And the odd thing is that a lot of people on the vessel are saying they're reluctant to get into the lifeboats because they think the lifeboat men and women are smelly. They're worried about the kind of company they'll keep by joining UKIP. Well, I've been to conferences and I've talked to a lot of people and I've worked with a bunch of UKIP lifeboatmen and women, and I've not found a single one who smells. I think they're a very fine group. But are we a bunch of reactionary old men? No.
Women.
Well, the charge is that we're a bunch of reactionary old men. The women in UKIP are sort of ignored by the media. The charge is, we're very grateful to have a lot of good women with us, but the charge is that we're a bunch of reactionary old men. And the reason that arises, I think, is that real men protect their women, their children, and their societies. And to understand the decline of Britain over the period we've been in the EU since 1972, you had to be politically aware, politically conscious, back then in 72. So if you were 22 in 72, you were born in 1950, which makes you 65 today. If you were younger in 72 than that, you'd be a bit younger today, and you were particularly politically aware back then in 72. So what I'm saying is it's not surprising that it's the men who are standing up and saying this isn't working and we shouldn't be part of it, because that's their duty in a society, is to protect the society. And it's not surprising that the people who have that awareness are now around the 60 mark and over. And my worry is that my children and most of our children and the generation that's grown up post-72 are like the frogs that you try to boil. You know, the story is if you want to boil a frog and you pop it into a pan of boiling water, it'll jump out. The way to boil a live frog, ladies and gentlemen, is to put it in a pan of cold water and heat the water up gently so that it falls asleep, then you boil it alive. That's what's happening to us in Europe. And we're losing the generation of people who know that it doesn't have to be the way it is now, and who know that it was better before we got started on this. Now, I'm not racist, and I value diversity. I'm not misogynistic, but I think men and women are not the same and never will be. I say honour the difference, try to understand the difference, I know it's hard, and vive les différences. And I'm not homophobic, and I don't think homophobia was ever or ever will be justified. So, I appeal to you to mobilise your friends and your families to help man the lifeboats and support the only party wholly committed to leaving the EU. We're also the only party, I think, best placed to broker a new relationship in the United Kingdom. We need a new settlement. Yep. Blair bequeathed us constitutional confusion. Cameron's delivered a constitutional crisis. And Labour's refusing to support English votes for English laws. The Conservatives are a very toxic brand in Scotland, as I know from being up there quite often. And the SNP is sounding less and less conciliatory. UKIP has the nation at heart. So do come and join us. Do come and help us. Do get stuck in, and do contribute to the future of our great Britain. Thank you.